A microphone hit the studio floor, not dropped by accident, released on purpose. Steve Harvey, the man who'd hosted thousands of television hours, who'd faced every curveball a game show could throw, just let it fall. The metallic clang echoed through Family Feud's Atlanta studio as 300 people held their breath. Something had just happened that cameras weren't supposed to capture, something real. But what could make America's most unshakable host break every rule in the book? The answer was standing right in front of him, a 17-year-old kid who wasn't even supposed to be there. Let me take you back 3 weeks, because what happened that day didn't start in a television studio. It started in a Detroit hospital room, where a grandmother was fighting for her life and a teenager was facing an impossible choice. The Thompson family had been waiting for this call for months. Every Family Feud hopeful dreams of that moment when production says yes. For the Thompsons, it wasn't just about the money, though God knows they needed it. This was supposed to be their chance. Their shot at something better. Dorothy Thompson, 73 years old, had raised her grandson Marcus since he was 8. His parents died in a car accident on I-75 during a winter storm. Dorothy was working 2 part-time jobs at the time, battling diabetes, living on fixed income in a 2-bedroom apartment that barely had heat some months. But she never let Marcus see her worry. To him, Grandma Dorothy could make miracles happen with coupons and prayers. The Family Feud opportunity felt like divine intervention. $20,000 could change everything. Dorothy's medication alone cost more than most people spent on rent. Marcus had college applications piling up with fees he couldn't afford. They'd been practicing together every night for weeks, drilling survey answers while Dorothy's insulin pump beeped in the background. But life had other plans. The morning of their scheduled taping, Marcus found his grandmother unconscious in the bathroom. Blood sugar spiked during the night. Paramedics rushed her to Detroit Medical Center, where doctors stabilized her, but insisted she stay for observation. "You have to go," Dorothy whispered from her hospital bed, her voice weak but fierce. "This is our shot, baby. Our one shot." Marcus protested. How could he leave her? How could he go on television while she lay there hooked up to machines? But Dorothy Thompson was stubborn even in weakness. She'd already called the producers, explained the situation, somehow convinced them to let Marcus represent the family alone. It was highly unusual. Minors rarely competed without adult supervision, but something in Dorothy's voice moved the production team. They made an exception. So there stood Marcus in the Family Feud studio that afternoon, feeling the weight of everything on his 17-year-old shoulders. The lights were overwhelming, the audience noise deafening. Steve Harvey, in his perfectly tailored suit, seemed larger than life itself. But Marcus had a mission. This wasn't about him. This was about the woman lying in that hospital bed, counting on him to make their dreams come true. The Thompson family played their hearts out. Dorothy's sister, her daughter, Marcus's cousin, they fought through every question. They weren't the fastest or the funniest, but they were determined. And Marcus surprised everyone, including himself. When Steve asked what people might do when they're nervous, Marcus answered without hesitation, "Pray."
Number 2 answer on the board. The audience erupted.
Steve gave him that warm smile that made millions of viewers feel seen. But it was during Fast Money that everything changed. The rules are simple. 2 family members answer 5 survey questions, hoping to score 200 points to win the grand prize. Marcus's aunt went first, scoring 146 points. Marcus needed just 54 more. Should have been straightforward. 5 quick questions, 5 quick answers. Steve began with his usual energy. "Marcus, you need 54 points to win $20,000 for your family. You ready, young man?" Marcus nodded, gripping the podium so tight his knuckles went white. "All right, here we go. 20 seconds on the clock. Name something people do when they're happy." "Dance." Good answer. Name something you might find in a teenager's bedroom. "Clothes." Name something that makes noise. "Music." Name something people save money for. Marcus hesitated, just for a moment, but in that pause, something shifted. The studio lights seemed to dim as weight settled over his young shoulders. "Family," he whispered. Steve's eyebrows raised. It was an unusual answer for a teenager. Most kids his age would say car, video games, college. But Steve had been hosting long enough to recognize something deeper in that response. Okay, young man. Last question. Name something that... Steve stopped. Something about Marcus's posture, the way he was breathing, made Steve pause mid-sentence. "You all right, son?" Marcus looked up. For the first time since cameras started rolling, his composure cracked. His eyes filled with tears, but he nodded quickly, trying to hold it together. "Name something that makes life worth living," Steve continued, his voice noticeably gentler. Marcus stared at Steve for a long moment. The studio went completely silent. Even the audience seemed to sense something profound happening. When Marcus finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but in that silence, every word carried like thunder. "Being with the people you love while you still can." The words hung in the air like a prayer. Steve's mouth fell open slightly. He'd heard thousands of answers over his years hosting, but something about this response, the pain in it, the wisdom beyond the teenager's years, the raw honesty, stopped him cold. Steve set down his cards and stepped closer to Marcus. "Son," he said softly, his voice catching, "that's not just a good answer. That's the answer." But Marcus wasn't finished. The dam had broken. Words began pouring out, words he'd been holding back for weeks. "My grandma raised me," he said, voice growing stronger. "She's in the hospital right now, and I don't know how much time we have left. She sacrificed everything for me. Everything. She worked 2 jobs. She went without food so I could eat. She never bought herself anything so I could have school supplies. And all she wanted was for us to be on this show together." Camera operators who'd seen hundreds of tapings found themselves wiping their eyes. In the control room, producers usually focused on timing and ratings reached for tissues. "She's watching right now from her hospital bed," Marcus continued, looking directly into the camera, "and I just want her to know that everything she taught me, everything she sacrificed, it was worth it. She made my life worth living." Steve Harvey had hosted Family Feud for over a decade. He'd seen emotional moments, heartbreaking stories, life-changing wins. But this was different. This wasn't just a contestant sharing a sad story. This was a young man bearing his soul, honoring the woman who'd given him everything. Without consulting producers, without checking the clock, without following any protocol, Steve walked around the podium and pulled Marcus into a hug. It wasn't a quick, camera-friendly embrace. It was the kind of hug a father gives a son, a mentor gives a student, a man gives another human being who needs to know they're not alone. "Son," Steve said, voice thick with emotion, "your grandmother didn't just raise a good young man, she raised a champion." The audience erupted. 300 people rose to their feet in spontaneous applause, but it wasn't typical game show cheering. It was the kind of applause that recognizes something sacred, something real, in a world often filled with pretense. But Steve wasn't done. Still holding Marcus by the shoulders, he turned to face the camera directly. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying gravity that transcended entertainment, "this young man just reminded us what Family Feud is really about. It's not about the money. It's not about the prizes. It's about family. It's about love. It's about the people who shape us, who sacrifice for us, who make our lives worth living." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something that caught the studio lights, his personal business card. "Marcus," he said, "I want you to have this. Not because you're a contestant, but because you're exactly the kind of young man this world needs. Your grandmother didn't just raise you, she raised a leader." Marcus took the card with trembling hands. It was more than paper and ink. It was validation, recognition, a symbol that his story mattered. "Now," Steve continued, turning back to face the board, "let's see how you did." The points were revealed one by one. Being with the people you love while you still can had earned 31 points for what makes life worth living. More than enough to secure victory. The Thompson family had won the $20,000, but in that moment, the money felt secondary. What mattered was the message that had just been sent to millions of viewers. That love is what makes life worth living. That family is worth any sacrifice. that sometimes the most profound truths come from those who've lived them. As confetti fell and celebration music played, Steve made another unprecedented move. He walked off the set, still in the middle of taping, and went directly to the production office. "I need you to get Dorothy Thompson on the phone," he told the producers, "right now." Within minutes, they'd connected the call to Marcus's grandmother in her hospital room. Steve took the phone, with Marcus standing beside him, and spoke directly to the woman who had made this moment possible. "Mrs. Thompson, this is Steve Harvey. I just met your grandson, and I need you to know something. You didn't just raise a good kid. You raised someone special, someone who just taught an entire studio and everyone watching at home what really matters in life." Through the phone, they could hear Dorothy crying, not from sadness, but from overwhelming pride and relief. Her sacrifice had been recognized. Her boy had succeeded. But Steve had one more surprise. Unknown to Marcus or the cameras, Steve had been quietly working with the show's producers and his own foundation during the commercial break. "Mrs. Thompson," he continued, "we're going to make sure you get the medical care you need. And Marcus, we're going to make sure you get to college, because what happened here today, that's not just television. That's a reminder of what's important." Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. In the months that followed, Steve Harvey's gesture created ripples extending far beyond that single episode. The business card he'd given Marcus became a symbol of mentorship, but more importantly, it represented a promise that was kept. Steve's foundation helped cover Dorothy's medical expenses, ensuring she received the specialized care her diabetes required. They also established a scholarship fund in her name, not just for Marcus, but for other young people who, like him, had overcome adversity through the love and sacrifice of their families. Marcus went on to graduate as valedictorian of his high school class. His acceptance speech, delivered to a packed auditorium, began with the words, "Being with the people you love while you still can." Dorothy, healthy and beaming in the front row, dabbed at her eyes as her grandson credited her with everything he'd achieved. But perhaps the most profound change was in Steve Harvey himself. That episode, which aired 6 months later, became one of the most watched in Family Feud history. Not because of drama or money, but because viewers recognized something authentic in a world that often feels manufactured. Steve began incorporating Marcus's message into his motivational speaking, his books, his personal philosophy. "That young man reminded me why I do what I do," he would later say in interviews. "It's not about being funny or entertaining. It's about connecting with people, about recognizing the humanity in every story that walks across that stage." The business card Steve gave Marcus still sits framed in Marcus's dorm room at Michigan State University, where he's studying social work with plans to help families like his own. But its real power isn't in what it represents, it's in what it started. The episode sparked conversations in homes across America about gratitude, sacrifice, and what truly makes life worth living. Families began talking more openly about their struggles and their love for one another. Grandparents shared stories of their own sacrifices. Young people gained new appreciation for the adults who'd shaped their lives. Dorothy Thompson, now healthy and proud, keeps a recording of that episode on her phone. She watches it whenever she needs a reminder that her sacrifices weren't in vain, that love always finds a way to multiply and return to those who give it freely. And Steve Harvey, he learned that sometimes the most powerful moments in television happen not when you follow the script, but when you throw it away and follow your heart. The microphone that dropped to the floor that day was picked up within seconds. But the impact of what happened when Steve Harvey stopped being a host and started being human, that continues to resonate, reminding us all that in a world focused on winning, the greatest victory is often simply recognizing the love that surrounds us. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten, because sometimes a teenager's few words really can change everything, including the way we see what makes life worth living.